Today's webinar, we will be addressing the use of artificial intelligence in recruitment. The advice that we are often given or we give to anyone interviewing for a job is dress for the job you want. Yet this is an advice that suggests that the candidate will be assessed based on his or her looks and overall style, ultimately building a facade to determine who she or he is and why they are the right person for the job. Could the use of algorithmically driven systems help eliminate bias and discrimination in recruitment? Or might it be that it simply exacerbates this problem whilst diffusing the responsibility to reduce prejudice and discrimination in employment? To discuss this further, we have an amazing panel for today. Mr. Ben Kaminsky is the founder and CEO of HR automation platform Eva AI. Dr. Nathan Mondragon is the Chief IO Psychologist at HireVue, and Robin Allen QC from Cloisters Chambers and the AI Law Hub. I would like first to begin with the presentations, and afterwards I will be opening the floor to discussion for a Q&A. Nathan, would you like to go first?
I will do. Thank you.
Perfect. The floor is all yours.
Okay. So what I'm going to talk about today is how to basically come in the recruitment and hiring process, how to combine human with AI together into a partnership for improved hiring and hiring with less bias, essentially. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview about HireVue, and I won't talk too much about who we are or other than how to get things done from a psychological measurement perspective, but with AI. But a little bit about HireVue. It's a solution, a sort of a multi-tenant solution that provides asynchronous on-demand video interviewing. It provides live video interviewing solutions. Our interview assessments, where we take our on-demand asynchronous interviews and turn them into assessments. That's what we'll really be talking about today. Our game-based assessments at the same time, and then we have coding challenges as well, and then a scheduling package, et cetera. And then we also have a chatbot that is at the top of this selection funnel, if you will, to work people through the application process, job matching process. HireVue has been around 14 years. We have over 17 million recorded video interviews in our library. We collect about 1 million assessments per year using our interview and game-based technology, et cetera. So we also have established a number of research and partnerships, as well as other types of partnerships from a disability, autism spectrum, et cetera. But we also, before I go there, we have a number of guiding principles that we came up with a few years back as people started to work and say, let's look at this machine learning and deep learning and so-called AI applications in an HR and a hiring perspective. We'd started it, we were there before pretty much anybody else. And we said, we should probably, there's no guiding principles, if you will, around this work. So we should come up with our own. So we came up with our own guiding principles to help direct our AI work. And there's a number of articles about it, et cetera. And they're more than just principles. They're actually things that they guide our decision making in the things that we do. And I can give you an example of that a little bit later. We also follow other professional practice guidelines and practices, et cetera. So there's in the United States, there's the uniform guidelines. Those are the sort of the legal guidelines to follow from a hiring perspective that require, if you're going to evaluate and hire somebody, you must follow these guidelines and these procedures. There's also professional standards and principles put out by the Society of Biopsychology, as well as the educational and psychology professions talk about what standards to follow, et cetera. So we're not just creating a guidebook on our own with our own AI principles. There's also very well-established legal and professional standards that must be followed, and more global standards as well that we institute and follow. We have a number of white papers to talk about how we do this, etc. And we have peer-reviewed journal articles as well that are in press as I speak, getting ready to come out later this year. Okay. From a partnership perspective, we take the bias part of our hiring algorithms very seriously. And as we will talk a little bit later, there's a lot of areas of bias and what we call adverse impact to look at. Disability is one of those. That's where some of these partnerships come from. But it's a very large topic. It's a very wide variety of disabilities sit under the American with Disabilities Act that you must look after and cover. And so we have a number of partners that help us and guide us in some of this development. For example, Integrate actually reviews every interview question that we design. We have my team of IO psychologists and data scientists create the questions that go into this interview library and then sometimes into the assessment library. And we also have the Integrate partners review those for, are they appropriate for an audience that's going to be on the spectrum? Are they appropriate for various audiences, et cetera? So we go through a couple of different hurdles to make sure that before we even put a question in a library to be used, that it's been vetted by a number of different professional standards. I'll just flip through this. There's a number of research, background, et cetera, in our tech reports that we follow. It's not just two people in a garage coming up with an idea and writing code and coming up with something. We actually have a team of about 30 industrial organizational psychologists, occupational psychologists, data scientists, cognitive scientists, et cetera, neuropsych folks that are all working on this solution together along with our coding and product folks. Okay, so why use pre-employment assessments? There's a number of reasons. One, they increase procedural fairness. It puts everybody on an even playing field and lets them be evaluated in a standard and consistent way, right? So that's one thing. It also starts to minimize the human bias that can get injected into the hiring process. A lot of different biases exist, especially around the interview process, from gender and age and racial bias, similarity, attractiveness bias, et cetera. We've done some studies where we found that people that were rated higher on attractiveness were 2 times the likelihood to be given a job offer, everything else being equal, right? So and that's not even an area that's even covered under the bias literature and under the protections in the legal areas, but it exists, and it's called the beauty premium. So a lot of different biases exist. Standardized procedures like interviews, assessments, et cetera, can help to minimize that. When you think of video interviewing, and it's sort of like doing blind auditions in a way, in that everybody is considered on the same level playing field, the same scale, the same questions, they're given the same opportunities, but yet they're taking the interview behind a curtain. They're not being evaluated based on their gender, for example. You start to see decisions being made on an equality basis versus a discriminatory basis. Right? And there's a classical study here with the orchestra selections behind curtains, and that increased female representation in the orchestra by 50%. Okay. There's also the other side of it is that it is more of a user-friendly. When you have the opportunity for candidates to take the interview assessment or a game-based assessment, whatever it might be, and you're not adding steps to the process, you're taking steps away from the process, but they're allowed to go through it at their own time, at their own will, it becomes a more user-friendly process versus requiring them to get on a plane and come into your location and go through the first round of interviews and assessments. Now it's not on their time, it's on your time, and it's not a very user-friendly experience, and it gets a little bit harder to get the candidates through the process. And with COVID, that's kind of gone out the window anyway. Those sort of site visits are being minimized today as we speak. So that's all the sort of peripheral evidence. And then there's also 100 years of what we call validation work that has actually looked at the statistical link between assessments and assessment types, hiring types, and outcome data like job performance, quality of hire information. And the best predictors of who's going to be a better hire are general mental ability tests or cognitive tests, structured interviews, and then work samples. So at HireVue, that's where we're putting our focus, is on the general mental ability test is our cognitive games, and structured interviews is what our platform was built on 15 years ago, that we have now wrapped the AI around that we'll talk about next. Okay. So an interview actually is an assessment, right? People think about AI-based interviews, and they think about it like, well, there's no guidance on this, there's no precedent for it, etc. That's actually wrong. There is precedent, because an interview is an assessment, and especially if you're scoring it with AI in some sort of a mechanized fashion, it puts it square in the definition of a pre-employment assessment. So there is guidelines, there is the uniform guidelines and other professional standards and procedures that must follow when you're doing this work. So in our solution, we have video questions combined with game questions that come together and roll up into various competency scores and give feedback, et cetera. So the candidate gets feedback, the hiring manager gets feedback, everybody knows how they did, et cetera. And then decisions can be made using that data in combination with the human evaluations to make decisions on to go forward or not go forward with that candidate. All right, so how do we go into the design of this? If you're going to build an assessment, any psychometric, psychological assessment must be built with be ethical and transparent, right? Even if you're using AI in the so-called black box, it has to be open, it has to be transparent in what you're measuring there. So the way we process this, and this should be any assessment or any AI-based evaluation procedure for hiring should follow a similar process, where you're looking and saying, you're collecting data and you're building a model to measure something. Whatever that measurement is, whether it's a competency, a psychological trait, a personality trait, a job performance outcome, et cetera, who should be promoted, who shouldn't be promoted, whatever it might be, that measurement has to be identified and modeled upon, and then checked for bias and mitigated if possibly. And that's where we are different at HireVue. We actually have some mitigation procedures that are groundbreaking that nobody else has been able to look at, and I'll talk about that. All right, so our approach to the measurement is an employability model. We look at the world of work and we say everybody in the world of work probably has to deal with other people. They have to be able to do the job, and they have to be willing to do the job. So they work with people, work with information, have a personality and a work style that they bring to the table, and then the technical side of the job. That could be knowledge, skills, abilities, whatever it might be. And we break those 4 buckets into various competencies. And I won't bore you with the details here, but each of these competencies listed have an AI measurement approach behind the scenes, whether it's through an interview question or a game question and tagging the gameplay, or what they say in the interview response is being scored by the AI. And then a competency score is being presented for whatever competency is being evaluated. So if you're evaluating service orientation and adaptability, for example, you're going to get a service orientation score and an adaptability score, and then a combined overall score on that assessment. Okay, so how do you build that measurement, right? So the way our approach to this is, whether it's a video or a game, we're collecting the data. So that there's the assessment input data. So in the video interview, it's the interview response. It's the same thing that if Argoy was going to interview me for a job, she would be evaluating what I said and how I said it. Right? And then she'd be coming up with some ratings on my answers. The same thing is followed here, where we evaluate what somebody says and how they say it. So we're evaluating the words and the word categories, how they say things, etc. On the game, we're evaluating the gameplay behavior, how they play the game. It's more than just what they get right and what they get wrong as far as answers go. It's also how they interact and play with the game. So it's a sort of a cognitive psychology approach to things. So we take that input data, but what we're not taking is age, race, gender, looks, religion, other data points that we know are linked to those background variables. So for example, if, and we've found this out in doing hundreds of these studies, if men and women use some words differently, which they do, those words can get blacklisted and never get added into the algorithm, right, on purpose. So we're purposefully, before we actually even score anything, we're blacklisting certain data sets that we know have a gender bias or have a racial bias or an age bias. And we're blacklisting those variables or those data points to not even get included into the evaluation. Another example of this is in the facial analysis arena. People look at this as facial recognition. We've done a lot of work over the last 4 years, and have collected, we said we have 17 million videos in our database. We've done a lot of analysis in this area and have found that what's called facial action units, the facial movement, has more bias to it and doesn't add predictive value to your algorithms. So we don't include facial action units in our input. That's why you'll see on the right-hand side over here, it's the text, it's the word patterns, and the gameplay behavior. There's no facial movement or anything like that being measured. Okay. So you take those inputs, you then want to validate that model to whatever it is that you're measuring. So there's another data set there that's being linked to. In our video interviews, what we're linking to is how people respond in expert ratings. In the gameplay behavior, we're linking it to other cognitive test scores on the same similar measure from another type of test. And then we're building the score, and then those scores can get used to rank order candidates or provide just a score for candidates and allow people to use that score as an additional input into what they want. So it is a sort of a data slide here, but on the interview process, we're measuring expert interview evaluators. So we'll take a million video interviews across a variety of competencies. We'll train expert raters within HireVue on what does a good answer look like, what does an excellent answer sound like, and what does a bad answer sound like on, say, service orientation. And they'll rate those answers. And then we'll get thousands of those ratings, and then we'll build the algorithm to predict that rating. The correlation coefficient there is what's called a construct validity, which means, are we measuring that competency at the right level? Anything in a 0.5 to 0.6 area meets best practice standards for construct validity using expert raters, and we're at or above that on every measurement we get. That's our minimum threshold. On the gameplay, we're measuring traditional tests in those areas, and those validity coefficients are again at the level expected with the scientific literature, the psychological literature of measurement around those capabilities. Okay. So in the end, the candidate will go through the interview assessment, through the game assessment. The scores will roll up, they'll get competency scores and then overall scores, and you can see what a standard report might look like on the right-hand side there. When you roll over one of those areas, you get feedback on what that score actually means. Essentially, what does an advanced score or an intermediate score look like? Okay. Here's some analysis of an outcome. So once this has been built and put in place and people have been hired using that assessment, then you want to go the next step, which is now link those assessment results to actual job performance outcomes. Right? It's one thing to know that you're measuring the things correctly, the psychological traits correctly. Now we want to make sure that those psychological traits, which we already knew up front, were linked to the job performance, but do a statistical link to those outcome job performance data variables. And that's what this chart is. This is actually a live chart showing the red bar and the blue bar are low performers and high performers, and that TKES is the actual performance scale that customer uses to measure their employees. So we split it in a point where the customer said, if we split it here, everybody below is not performing as well, and everybody above is performing at or above. And then you match that up with your test scores. So the 0 to 33 is the assessment score, 33 to 67 is the middle range test score, and 67 to 100 is a high range test score. And you can see as the assessment scores go up, so does the number of higher job performers, right? If you look at the bottom left, the lower scoring individuals, that's where the bulk of the lower job performers also sit. So what this means is you have statistical validity linking the assessment to subsequent job performance of individuals in the role, actually, right, in the target role. And those numbers at AUC, that's the actual statistical sort of number that we use to track that, which is a significant result, essentially. So in the end, you end up with an assessment that the test is measuring things that are important to the job. you know you're measuring those things given the process I walked through earlier and how to measure it. And then now we know that it's actually statistically linked to job performance outcomes as well. But what we don't know and what we haven't shown you yet is how you actually check for bias, right? So when you check for bias, and then if you find it, can you get rid of it? There's statistical procedures that are followed in this area. And we've gone through some AI audits and occupational psychology audits, et cetera. And a lot of the AI community isn't necessarily aware that there's actually procedures and statistics to follow to measure bias, especially in the assessment and hiring arena. And there's these statistical procedures like the adverse impact ratio analysis, which is what's presented here, and other statistical significance tests as well. So that's what our team of IO psychologists and data scientists work together to do these. A visual here is, if you think of that graph on the left, going top to bottom is the top scoring individuals to the bottom scoring individuals on the assessment. And if you draw your lines at the 33 and 66 percentile, you would start to see below the 33rd percentile, meaning the bottom third of people scoring on the assessment, there's more females than males sitting down there. And at the top, there's more males than females sitting there. And that has an adverse impact ratio of 0.67, which means males are passing the test at a significantly higher rate than females are. And there's a problem there. That's what's called a red flag rule. So we follow that as the first sort of check. When we find that, and here's in a live example, when we find that, we then go back to the data and say, can we predict that group difference? So in this case, can we predict that males and females are scoring differently, and what are we looking for? So we go to that process, we look for the proxies that generate that behavioral data to score males and females differently. We then start to say, what do those look like? And what data variables are in that data set that are causing males and females to score differently? And we might see here that the cognitive state words and vocal variation are causing that difference. And you can look at the impact of the two areas. So you start to remove the areas. So we remove the cognitive state words, and we see our ratio goes now to a 0.91, which is good. And then we remove more vocal variation, and we see the impact goes to 0.97, which virtually means males and females are treated basically equal. Right, so we remove those features. We then go in and recalculate the adverse impact, and you can see it went from a 0.76 in red there on the lower left to a 0.93 in green on the lower right. The R value means how predictive is that assessment of the measurement job performance. And we went from 0.58 to a 0.55. So I'll take that 0.03 difference for a complete significantly reduction of the bias in the algorithm any day. Right. So, and this is a chart of how we actually measure it across the actual data from one of our reports where we're looking at ethnicity across various competencies. And you can see that there's no adverse impact ratio. And then the other columns in that field, that table, are also showing other statistical tests that we're looking for that are also non-significant, which is what you're looking to achieve here. So just real quick, I'll wrap up here. Just a couple of results. We've got some customers that have basically looked at diversity impact. So it's more than just quality of hire, as we said. It's also you're getting a more diverse workforce, and there's some significant results there across a number of different customers, increasing the diversity hires and the diversity numbers of applicants and then hires. And then there's also the outcome data as well, looking at interview to hire ratio for some of these organizations, showing that they're, with the assessment in place, they're having to interview to get the final hiring decision far fewer people than they used to before the assessment, which is an indication that the assessment is passing quality people into the next step, into that live hiring stage or that final hiring decision. Okay, I am at the top of the hour for my time, and we open for questions when we get done, but look forward to chatting afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Nathan. That was excellent. And I can see that there are already a couple of questions in the Q&A. So this will give us some food for thought for later on. But for now, I would like to invite Robin to begin with his presentation and to hear more about the legal challenges that might be posed by the use of AI. Robin, the floor is all yours.
Okay, can you see me now?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, great, good. Well, thank you very much for that presentation. I'm going to see if I can get my slides up now and get going here. Okay, is that looking like a top slide to you? Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this Zoom seminar. It's a real pleasure to be talking, and I'm the lawyer here. I understand that quite a lot of the students that will be listening and the other people listening into this may be involved in law studies. My perspective is as a UK lawyer. I'm just going to run you through what I'm going to talk about here. There are going to be 7 headings. It's going to be fairly light on detailed law, but I'm going to be giving you some resources that you'll be able to access later on if you want to follow through on some of the points that I'm talking about. So first, let's get into the intro. Why should we be talking about the use of artificial intelligence? You've not just heard from Nathan Mondragon about HireVue's work, but we know that artificial intelligence is being increasingly used in the workspace now. KPMG last year, one of the big 4 accountancy and business consultancy firms, reported in 2019 that on 30 of the world's largest companies, 30% were already deploying AI, and 17% were deploying AI at scale across their enterprise. And just this year, the EU's Futurium, which is a special think tank looking into the use of artificial intelligence, particularly in the EU 27, Norway, Iceland, and the United Kingdom, said that 40% of enterprises have adopted at least one AI technology, 25%, and that's to say about a quarter, have adopted at least 2. Some of them will have adopted it in recruitment, and as we shall see in a moment, there's a whole branch of other areas in the employment space where these things are being used. So, where are they being used? Well, recruitment. We've heard from HireVue about the interviewing process, but it's not just that. One major area that is taking place already in relation to recruitment is what's called internet scraping. So a business wants to look for new recruits, and it'll set up an AI machine system that will scrape CVs off the internet, maybe from LinkedIn, from boards where people have posted their CVs to try and identify potential candidates. And so the first stage that we need to think about is the actual advertising of jobs, how that is now increasingly being carried out through AI systems. And that's really interesting because we already know that people are gaming that system in a number of different ways. So it's known that there is quite a lot out there on the internet about how you can use particular buzzwords in your CV in different ways. For instance, there's quite a lot of research that's been used in the past that if you just put the word Oxford, some systems will assume that you've been to a top university, or Harvard if you're the other side of the pond. Of course, there's a kind of low-level war going on between clever people thinking about what to put in their CV and then the artificial intelligence systems that are looking at it. COVID, the pandemic, has brought together a huge amount of new work using artificial intelligence systems. So recent work that I'll tell you about in a moment that we've been involved in has identified firms using body temperature mapping systems, breathing monitors, contact tracing, analysis of medical data, to make sure that people are not susceptible or thought to be particularly susceptible, wearable devices to look into your movements, hygiene tracking to actually assess the number of times that you wash your hands while at work, for instance. There are AI systems that are looking at the risk of unionization, and which are out there at the moment. And we know that systems like the HireVue system have been used in redundancy selection processes, which are particularly important as the pandemic develops and businesses are closing down offices or workplaces, and therefore redundancy selection has become really important. It's been thought that it's sensible to use some sort of AI system to do that as well. Now, this has led to something which is really important that people listening to this program understand. It's known as the trust problem. And we know that it's incredibly significant in Europe. It may not be in the States, but right here, it's hugely important. In the summer, in June 2020, the Center for Data Ethics and Innovation issued what it called the AI Barometer Report. And that barometer report showed that there was huge distrust of mechanized systems across the workspace and beyond. And that was done really before one particularly significant event that took place in the summer here in the United Kingdom, which was the debacle over school exams, A-levels and GCSE, in which, because of the problems of students not being able to take their exams or not being able to take them effectively, and the government being concerned about grade inflation in exams, the Ofqual, the Office for Quality in Education, was set the task of developing an AI system that would predict exam grades. And this, as everybody from the United Kingdom will know, led to a huge furore because it wasn't personalized in the outcome. Ofqual's task was simply to predict an outcome which avoided grade inflation, but of course it didn't personalize the individual outcomes, and that was the worry. So the barometer took place and measured very low-level trust before then, and immediately afterwards, the British Computer Society, the Chartered Institute for IT, carried out its own trust analysis. The public don't trust computer algorithms to make decisions about them, survey finds, 8th of September 2020. And since then, it's not published yet, but the Trade Union Congress has been looking at the trust issue amongst unionized employees, and trust remains a really huge problem. Now, this has got consequences in a variety of different ways, which we can talk about in the Q&A, but I'll pick up a little bit later in my talk for you in a moment. So the next slide is going to just pick up really on the first question. What are actually talking about? We've heard a little bit about how HireVue works in the field that it goes, but it's worth just getting some definitions down so that we can think a little bit harder about what we're talking about. Artificial intelligence, and it's important to understand this because what I'll be showing you in a minute, or telling you a little bit more about at the moment, is that we're moving towards regulation specifically of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So the European Commission talks about artificial intelligence as systems that display intelligent behavior by analyzing their environment, taking actions with some degree of autonomy to achieve specific goals. I'm just going to leave that slide up there for a moment so that you can read it again, those of you that perhaps are new to this. Many of you may have seen that definition or other ones. It's not written in law, but it is broadly the definition that the European Commission uses. Now, I know we're in the world of Brexit, and you may think what the European Commission says right now doesn't matter. If you think that, then let me change your mind straight away, because we are a small island between the States and Europe, but we get our equality law and our data protection law not from America, but from Europe. And I'll pick up that point because it's very important when we listen to when we reflect on the debate that the things talked about by Nathan in a moment. So that's AI. And then we need to understand a little bit about what we call machine learning. And here's another definition. I hope I can just move my things around here so I can just read it out to you. Machine learning is a technique that allows algorithms to extract correlations from data with minimal supervision. And you will recall, for instance, from the previous presentation, the discussion about the process of extracting correlations. So, for instance, in the HireVue model, somebody carries out an online game and has an online interview. Information is extracted from the way they perform on the online gaming and the way they talk in the course of the interview. And then, as Nathan pointed out, that is correlated with a set of data and scores are attributed to it. So that correlation is based on a machine learning technique. And it's very important that you understand that this process of correlation relates to what is often called in the trade training data or the training set. Nathan talked about the way in which they collected information over many years, which they then used as the correlation data set for the way in which they approached it. So, okay, that's machine learning. And so now we have to talk a little bit about when this might breach equality laws. So the first question, how might this breach equality and non-discrimination laws? Well, the short answer is whenever the Equality Act 2010 applies. And I want to pause there for a second, because it's really important that people listening to this understand that the Equality Act 2010 is based on European equality law, and that European equality law is not the same as American equality law. There are at least two completely fundamental differences. The fundamental difference number one is that US equality law proceeds on the basis of its history. And the history there, of course, is a divided nation, the Civil War, giving rights to African Americans, and then discovering over time that there was an appearance of bias in employment systems, where people didn't fully understand what was going on, but the outcome seemed to look like there was some sort of a biased system. And the way American equality law was built up was on the basis that you analyzed to see if there was a pattern or practice which seemed to suggest some sort of bias historically against African Americans, and then later on a gender basis and so on, and different grounds, as we've heard. European equality law applies from a different process. It's not had the same history. What it's looking at is simply what's called equal treatment, literally equal treatment. And there's a principle of equal treatment which applies always in the context of UK and European equality law. So how might that operate to cause discrimination? Well, the first is when there are biased data sets that are used to train a machine learning algorithm. So if the training data that is used is biased, then there will be unlawful direct discrimination almost always as a result. A second way that it can occur is when algorithms themselves are unlawfully, indirectly discriminatory. Now, here's another point, the second point about difference between the US and Europe. You'll have heard about the 4/5 rule that Nathan was talking about. The 4/5 rule has no place in European indirect discrimination law whatsoever. I litigated this point in a case called Seymour Smith, and the European Court, the Court of Justice of the European Union, said that you didn't have to show that you'd crossed a 4/5 rule of differential treatment. It was enough if there was a small but persistent disparity in the way that people were treated by what appeared to be a facially neutral practice that was carried on. And so important was this difference that when the directives in 2000, the Race Directive and the Workplace Equality Directives were made, and later when the Gender Directive, the old Equal Treatment Directive was amended to the new recast Gender Directive, the preamble to both of those directives made it clear that the law in the case of Seymour Smith, that's to say the European approach, not the American approach, was the one that applied. Now that's really significant because huge amount of the systems that are used in recruitment in Europe are written to American standards. There's a huge amount of academic or semi-academic literature trying to work out how the 4/5 rule can be applied in the kind of systems that are bought over here. And just as you've heard from HireVue now, they're not working to the European standards in relation to indirect discrimination. So it's a big problem, and one which will become more important as soon as these issues are litigated further. Now, the third way in which discrimination can take place is because in European law, there is a specific rule saying that there's a need to make reasonable adjustments. So, for instance, if you can't access, for one reason or another, a computer with your face for some reason or another, perhaps because you're disabled, there would be a specific need to make reasonable adjustments. A fourth way is that, this wouldn't ordinarily apply to something like HireVue, but some AI-based techniques can amount to harassment, which is another form of discrimination. And so altogether, we've got these different ways in which this can happen. So I'm just going to push on. Now, one of the problems that is faced in relation to discrimination is the question of proof. And often employees don't know, they know bad things have happened to them, or workers, but they don't know exactly how they've happened. And European law says that in those circumstances where there's a lack of transparency, the burden of proof passes to the employer or the system. And this is where we have what's called the black box problem, because machine learning techniques operate by working out correlations, by going through literally millions of iterations trying to work out what has happened. It's called the black box problem, and you can see here in the slide exactly how that's worked. But the real problem here is that you can't actually work out why the correlations have been made in the way that they have. And that will be a problem for an employer trying to defend the use of these kinds of systems. So let's go to the next slide. Not a lot more here. Now, in parallel with the Equality Act, there's a question of getting to grips with what actually has happened. And that's where the General Data Protection Regulation comes into play. You can go some way to opening the black box by asking for your data, making a data subject access request. using these articles of the General Data Protection. And the European Data Protection Board has said meaningful information about the logic involved will have to be disclosed. And that's often really problematic, because if you're an employer buying the HireVue system, actually getting to the meaningful logic may be beyond your powers. So getting practical, just a couple of more slides from me. Employers, we recommend here that the AI law consultancy conduct a legal analysis at the outset from a European UK point of view, know what's ethical, get supplier indemnities, use an algorithmic impact analysis, carry out auditing, and use AI test tools. For workers, own your data, go and ask any system that uses your data in any way in recruitment, get a data subject access request in, and they'll have to show you everything they've done with your data. Take a grievance if a machine rejects you, join a union, know your privacy rights, and in the end, you might want to sue. So what's to do if you want to know more? Bookmark AIlawhub.com, where we've set out a whole raft of information. I should tell you, at the moment, we're working with government, with the Trade Unions Congress. I'm on the steering group for the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation's Bias Review, which is due to come out very soon. I'm working with the Council of Europe, currently on a training program with the Trade Unions Congress, but I've also worked with business trying to help them to get around these problems and to reach sensible conclusions. You can call me on that number, or you can speak to me at the two email addresses. D Masters is my partner in the AI law consultancy that we run. Here's just a quick screenshot of the AI law consultancy website, give you some idea of some of the things we talk about. And that's me done. So I hope that was a nice way of sort of complementing the interesting points we've had about the business side and now some of the legal framework. And I'll close with this point. Somewhere between now and probably next Easter, there will be proposals for regulation in relation to this area from the European Commission. They've been consulting all year about it. And so if you're interested in these topics, you need to keep an eye on that. If you follow us on Twitter, you will get the links as they come up. Check our website or just keep in touch. Thanks.
That was brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much, Robin. I'm sure that by now we have quite a lot to discuss, although not yet, because we have one final exquisite speaker, and that's Ben Kaminsky. If we heard already what is currently the case or the trend, what are the legal implications, then I think that Ben will tell us what the future will look like, or at least this is how I would imagine your presentation. And we look forward to hearing more from you. So the floor is all yours, and then I will open the floor to discussion. So please carry on with the questions at the Q&A section.
Thank you very much, Sergio. Well, yeah, I'll try to, I think I'm going to complement the scientific approach and the legal approach to recruiting and the AI and how we do recruiting with AI. My angle will be quite different, so that's really good. I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Yeah. Can you see my screen? Yeah.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yes. So the future of HR and strategic automation. We are going to talk about hiring candidates and also employee when it comes to career mobility. And we're going to take the process automation aspect of it. So really concrete how AI and automation is beneficial to the hiring process. So a very quick overview of Eva.ai. We've won some awards for our platform. We operate from London, but we work for international company, a large enterprise company with really complex, or let's say sophisticated recruitment process. We have experts in enterprise software and engineers, experts in machine learning, natural language understanding. This is for the chatbot aspect, and robotic process automation. And we have a broad range of partners and certification. So that's me on the right with the winner of Unleash, which is like a very good conference on HR for those who are interested. Automation is the next disruption of work. So we're going to talk about HR 4.0. That's the term we use to when the fourth industrial revolution that we are currently living in is applied to HR. A little quote from the McKinsey Global Institute. So yeah, what's happening in HR and in automation? Eva is powering HR 4.0. 4.0 is a mindset. It's about automating. It's seeking automation always when you design or improve or transform a work process. Our slogan is, if it can be automated while adding value for all stakeholders involved, that's very important, it should be automated. So the stakeholders are obviously the talent, so employees and candidates, hiring managers, and the HR executives. So today we are going to talk about how automation and AI gives more responsiveness and persistence and cadence for the HR function, how automation and AI gives efficiencies and effectiveness for hiring managers, and how AI and automation gives an incredible talent experience. So we're going to talk a lot about experience. Eva.ai is a platform where we have converged 5 technologies. And with those 5 technologies, we are helping HR personalize their engagement and communication with candidates and employees. Those 5 technologies are written here. So we use machine learning, part of AI, automation, natural language processing bot or natural language understanding bot, analytics, so predictive analytics, and an ecosystem plugged with a microservice integration. So this is more the backend part of the platform. So the 2 solutions, with those 5 technologies, we are able to service 2 solutions dedicated to the experience of candidates and employees for talent acquisition and for talent management. Our goal is like to improve their experience across every moment in the HR funnel. So from the moment they been looking at an ad till the moment they are being onboarded or redeployed for a career move. And we use a particular approach. We use a conversational and robotic automation approach to transform this experience and give them an improved journey. So you can see our 2 solutions, one dedicated to the digital candidate journey and one dedicated to the digital employee journey. So why are we doing that? Why Eva exist? Well, today in 2020, for example, 60% of people when they go through an application, they say that they have a bad experience. Also, it's important because they are sharing this experience with others. the millennials, they are not career oriented. They want to have a fast changing career, having actually more experience in a CV context, and they are living. They want to lead their organization fast. There is a burnout, and it's causing like a half of the annual workforce turnover, because hiring managers and HR executives, they are doing a lot of like mundane task or data entry task that can be automated, and you will see how we are doing that. It's important because employers, they cannot find skilled people fast. Candidates and employees, they want a faster response time. We are used to Deliveroo, we are used to Uber. Now we can get a pizza in 15 minutes. We can track when the pizza is like out of the oven, when it is delivered by the delivery guy. So everybody wants faster process. They want a simpler process, and obviously when people are focusing on high level value task, they are more engaged, and the company is turning more profitability. Experience is also like very important, because for example, a bad candidate experience can cause customer churn. So Virgin Group had a bad experience with their candidates, gave a bad experience with their candidates. Those candidates were actually taking Virgin, taking Virgin flights, and this caused $6 million in lost revenue. So it's very important. So we're gonna deep dive into the digital candidate journey. So a candidate usually goes through, they come from an ad, they come from a career website, they come from referrals, and they need to go through a screening process. So this is where we help, as you will see. We help in the screening process, asking a question to collect fast the information, store the information in the system, and give this information to the right people in large enterprise, so the right manager, the right part of HR. And then we also help on we focus not on the interview, we focus only on the hard skills. So we don't touch on soft skill. So for us, the bias is less, it's less of an issue. It's because the bias, it would be, it's about the people who are interviewing. So we don't touch the interview part of the process. We are here to facilitate the overall process and efficiency of the company, and we are here to give a good experience on to the candidates and the employees. The concrete use application of automation and AI, we'll see like a demo of the candidate experience a little bit later that I've recorded. Those are the concrete use of the application. Sourcing people from large database, reactivate those people with like a chatbot campaign, engage the candidates that are going on the career site with a chatbot welcoming and asking for more information, screening, assessing, shortlisting exactly the people with that says they have the skills, or that says that they have the experience or went to this school, scheduling, coordination, onboarding, when it comes to collecting the right to work in the UK, for example, the document, or the national, or like some diplomas and so on to prove things on the CV, and as you will see, some mobility and career path to recommend the right jobs to the candidates or employees that would be interested by them. here, like the digital employer journey. So here we are talking about somebody who is already working in a company. The chatbot here is helping the HR and manager collecting faster information, updating the information of the candidate so that they have a fresh look at their company workforce. And then thanks to intelligent robotic process automation with notification to several departments of an international group, for example, propose some career progression information, propose some learning courses, or redeploy the employee to another post. So for instance, for the United Nations, what we are doing right now, we are refreshing all their database of employees so that they can help the United Nations Development Program satisfy the crisis response for COVID-19. So it's a lot of, as you will see, getting availabilities of the employees, getting their fresh skills, and how, if they are willing to contribute to the crisis response, is collecting live all those data that with a human team that would be impossible to contact 20,000 employees in a row and refresh a whole database just like with people. So this is where like the automation and hiring, both in the candidate and the employee journey, is really important. The concrete use application. So for example, skill mapping. So asking their employees or candidates what skills they have. So again, hard skills, learning and development, internal mobility, asking for feedback and some performance on each other, and managing profiles. So this is the system of EVA in a nutshell. But the interesting part here from an automation perspective is this part, the microservice API integration. Large enterprise, usually they come with a legacy system, which dates from the software era of 2000 or 2010. And what how EVA helps is connecting on those legacy system and making sense of like their data. So we get candidates and vacancies from the system, and then we enrich the data and we send back enriched data for mobility and a better experience of the talent and the employees. So I don't know how many minutes I'm in, because I don't see the. Yeah. So here I prepared like a small use case application. This is the digital candidate journey of our own on our own website. So there are a lot of like very talented students and that are listening to me. Feel free to apply and have a taste of the experience, and obviously we will consider your CV. So here I'm going to lower it down. So here we are in our career website. There is like the widget of EVA starting to engage with like the candidates. Also, you can access EVA via the job application. Here you are in the talent portal. So it's a web application that is responsive for device. And here EVA is starting to engage and register you. So it goes much faster and it's much more ludic. It's much more like friendly than a form. So here you can like appreciate that it's a natural language processing chatbot, which means that it not only recognizes the word, but it recognizes pattern, and we use machine learning to give the best possible answer to the candidates in context. So we are recognizing the intent of the candidates. So the portal is like really it's really made to collect data, collect attachment, collect CVs, asking for information. And in 90 seconds, you have finalized your registration. So you will see, for example, here, I'm answering, I work for eva.ai. So he says, thanks a lot. What is your job title at eva.ai? I'm the CEO. Oh, thanks, Ben. I've set your current job details as CEO at eva.ai. So it's clever also because we are putting the right information in the right cells in the database, so that then we can like reuse those cells. So we ask obviously a GDPR consent to the candidates, and then like the person is signed in, and the person can talk to Eva, ask for chat topics, but also ask Eva to contact the right person inside the organization. As you can see, you can upload files. So here is like the candidate profile. It's the same for the employees. There are experiences. You can like parse your CV, and you will see that the CV is intelligently parsed. All the data are intelligently parsed in your profile, so you gain a lot of time instead of filling your profile again. So this was in a nutshell the talent experience. And what maybe we were like a little bit too quick was the part where Eva recommend relevant job vacancies to the candidates or employees. So based on their profile, then Eva is going to recommend job vacancies or deployment, short-term deployments, gigs for to the user, to the employee or the candidate. And it's based on all the information that has been collected via the conversation, based on all the information of the CV that has been parsed, but also based on the funnels, the pipelines where the candidates and employees are. So we are talking more about pipeline workflow automation here. So that's why I'm going to give you like a quick glimpse on the human capital management platform. So what you have seen so far is the talent platform. Here, I'm gonna give you like a glimpse on the HCM platform. And this is where we help companies be more efficient and effectiveness. So we are using hard skills queries that are really factual. We don't use inherent like biased data, like gender and age, and nor we don't even like put in our data model the postcode, because postcode can also generate bias. But we do sort a long list of candidates and employees based on their availability, based on their hard skills, based on their location or their commuting time distance. And we have a machine learning process from supervised learning to reinforcement learning, where, for example, when HR executive or hiring managers after the interviews validate or invalidate the candidate or the employee moving to the next step of the recruitment, we take in account also this data to make this long list more and more relevant and surface the employees and candidates in a more relevant, more and more relevant fashion. So, so a typical project implementation, it's long. It's take between like 12 to 24 weeks. But once this is done, like the organization really can scale, and the employee and the candidate have like an amazing experience where they are informed. The recruitment process is transparent, and it's fast. So this is what does it mean concretely? We are really improving the experience. Our chatbot has a 4.4 out of 5 positive score with employees and candidates. We increased productivity drastically, up to 25 hours per week for HR executives. We reduced HR ops cost. Millions are saved when we are talking about large enterprise, and obviously it's speed and accurate at the end, because like people are communicating with the right person inside the organization. So talent management effectiveness is also a key benefit for the hiring and career mobility process. So this is it.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for that. I should probably mention that I am very happy as the moderator because my main concern is timing. So you all did great. And now one of the things that moderators normally do, and this goes for dry and boring presentations, is that they must come up with answers, with questions after that. But that's not one of these cases because we've actually been inundated with questions. So I will now open the floor to discussion, and I will be reading a couple of the questions that we have already received, and they have been upvoted. And most of them, they are not really directed to one of the presenters, so please feel free to share your views. So the first question is from Paul Bernard from the University of East Anglia. Gaming artificial intelligence is obviously an issue, but is there evidence to suggest whether AI can be gamed any more than human systems, because those are gamed too?
I can speak to kind of the work that we do at HireVue. I can't speak for too many other systems, but certainly when you think of traditional assessments, they can be gamed fairly easily. Some assessments, like personality assessments, you can start to read what they're looking for and answer in appropriate ways to what we call fake good or fake bad. With the interview assessments, it's hard to fake one way or the other because there's so many data points being analyzed and collected that even if you sprinkled your answers with certain words or word categories that you thought were important to the answer or to the job, there's so many data points, it's going to increase or decrease your score by a small fraction. So it's harder, in my opinion, to game certain systems in certain ways, the way they're being scored, but other systems probably easier. I think Robin mentioned the CV scoring systems, and what we have found is they take the job description and white text it and paste the text from the job description into the background of the CV in white text, so the human eye can't see it, but the AI system picks up on it, and their CV is scored at highly because it's matching the job description. And that's obviously gaming the system in a way that's inappropriate. But so it's fairly easy in some ways, hard with other systems, in my opinion.
And I can see here there's also another question. I certainly sympathize with that one. How does an accent affect the voice test? And how is this combated as a proxy, I'm guessing?
Yeah, I think that's probably directed towards the interview assessment. So it's all dependent upon the data you have to build your algorithm, right? As Robin said, your training set. When we do our algorithm builds, our training sets are very large and very robust. So when we're scoring an English response data set, we're not just getting US data or UK data, we're getting English responses from across the globe. In many cases, people have English as their second or third language, not their first. So their accent can be very dramatic. Then in that training data set, when your algorithm has been built, when you look at the group differences like race and gender, you also want to look at country of origin, language, and accent differences as well. So in one study we had in the algorithm, we had people from 54 different countries represented, and we knew which people had English as their first versus second or third language, and we use that as a group classifying variable. to check and make sure that there were no scoring differences across those accents of those English as first versus second language, and there were not. But there's, you run that data and you run that analysis, and if you do find differences, then you have to make a decision of, does this algorithm get deployed globally, or does it get deployed regionally as appropriate, given where the differences don't exist? Then we've got to do that with some language things. So with Spanish algorithms, we've done that. We've said it can only be deployed in this region or in this country or in this area, because in Spanish case, European versus Latinx is different. And we couldn't separate out that. We couldn't combine that difference without scoring differences. So therefore you had to treat them separately.
And Robin, would you like to comment on that?
I'm really interested to hear Nathan describe how the system works. And I mean, he and I both understand, I'm sure, that a faulty training set is always going to be a problem. And obviously the longer you work at it, the better. But I'm interested in some of the one-offs. I was for a while special legal advisor to our Disability Rights Commission, and one of the cleverest members of our staff at that time was a man with cerebral palsy, and his ability to speak, it wasn't a stutter. It was absolutely personal to him. And to be blunt, for the first 2 or 3 meetings that I was in with him, I really couldn't understand what he was saying. But after a while, I learned to tune my ear to how he was speaking. Now, that kind of disability is a one-off, because people have cerebral palsy in a million different ways. And you won't get anybody in the training set with that. So my question is what do you do to allow for that kind of person who, in this particular case, the guy was very smart, and he later became a judge, intriguingly. And I'm really glad to have worked with him, but I have a feeling he wouldn't have got hired with the HireVue system.
Well, he wouldn't have taken the HireVue system, more than likely, Robin, right? So yeah. The approach is, our recommended approach is, we can't account for any and all disabilities, as you just said. It's a wide bucket. Our approach, best practice recommendation, and this is by law in the US, but the best practice everywhere else, recommendation is to allow candidates to claim that they need an accommodation, whatever that might be. So, and those accommodations can range from, I need more time to go through to give my answers and give my responses because I have a speech impediment. So I need more time to present. That could be one accommodation. It can be bypassing the system altogether. And that is really up to the individual organization or company that is deploying the system to do the hiring. Right. So it's our recommendation they deploy that process, so those individual cases get treated as individual cases and don't get adversely screened in or out. Right. Okay. Whether that happens all the time or not, I can't say. Some companies aren't going to do that, and some applicants aren't going to disclose if they need an accommodation. In those scenarios, what we have built into the technology to help with that is what's called a thresholding. So in that extreme case of your colleague, more than likely, if he went through the HireVue system, he would not have been scored, because he would have had too much data outside of a threshold range. So we would flag that, the computer would flag it and say, we can't score it. And then that candidate is told to, or that candidate record is flagged for the employer to look at and probably contact that individual directly one-on-one.
Can I just follow up? I mean, I'm really interested in this. I mean, in essence, what you're saying is that there will be people for whom HireVue won't work, in short.
Yeah.
I mean, and there may be different reasons, but essentially what you're looking at is the middle of the bell curve, or maybe not the outliers on the bell curve in a variety of things. there's nothing wrong with that. That I think is what you're saying in essence.
Right. In the world of assessments, there's always people that are going to need accommodations. Whatever the assessment, it could be a paper and pencil bubble in your answers from the 1960s test. That test is going to need an accommodation. So not 100% of the people in the world aren't going to be able to take every assessment, and will need an accommodation or a side process or whatever it is. And HireVue is no different.
Can I add another question here? So how do you deal with discrimination in the form of speech patterns or problems with code switching? That's another question, this one from Joseph Saverimutu from the University of Liverpool.
I think we just addressed it with I'm not sure what code switching is. Maybe somebody could explain that to me, but I think we addressed it, where the accommodations and thresholding and making sure your training data set is robust.
And now I have another one which is addressed to Ben. Ben, would you recommend the NHS to introduce algorithms into hiring and or promotion? There is also a link.
Yeah, I've clicked on the link here while I was listening. Well, the promotion patterns, if they are based on facts, years of services and results from the NHS patients, I think the algorithm can be generating short list of candidates more fairly than if it's done via an interview, or I think it could generate some good short list of people based on their merit, based on their years of experience, based on their commitment, based on the feedback from the customers. So yeah, I think it's a very good way to democratize promotion and generate some unbiased but a meritocratic list of promotees.
Another question that we have, and I think that this one it goes to all of you, is from Jonathan Gascoigne. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing the last name. How does the diversity of those working in AI and data science influence the design and application of AI technologies and constrain their potential for driving economic impact and societal good?
Shall I have a shot at that one first? I mean, I can't give a full answer at all. What I can say is that there's quite a lot of research going on at present about this. So one of the big issues that all the IT organizations like the British Computer Society, but the equivalent in the States and so on, the IEEE, for instance, have all been very concerned that coding has been predominantly done by men, and that's an issue that is well out there. So a little bit of search on Google, or drop me an email and I can point you in the right direction. There's another more interesting, to me, I mean, I think that's a really important point, but here we have Arjaro asking questions of 3 men about all of this, so maybe that's still significant. But another really interesting one is about facial recognition technology. Now, there is a lot of research about this. There's a really interesting paper which I was just reading yesterday, which I'd recommend, which was published by the Alan Turing Institute, I think this summer, by David Leslie. And it's really one of the best I've read recently about, and it actually traces the issue back a long way, showing how even back in the 19th century, when they were working on what kind of sensitivities you should have in photographic paper, that it was designed for light skin tones, and then you get issues with a kind of an idea of a model photograph which didn't take into account, for instance, Afro or Asian skin tones. That came through in the way in which electronic cameras were designed as to what standard contrasting they should be used. And there's a lot of very interesting work from MIT, for instance, about how facial recognition technology has been poor historically. It's definitely getting better, but poor historically in recognizing non-white skin tones. So it's quite good at recognizing, differentiating between male and female and age and so on for white faces. It has a very poor record, or historically has had a poor record, and some systems still will, for particularly Black women. Interestingly, it's thought that in the Far East, it's not very good at recognizing your Asians, and rather good at recognizing Chinese and Japanese faces. So there's a local problem in relation to this. And if that technology is built into systems that, for instance, as I was talking in my presentation, that are looking at the way people move around the workplace, for instance, that could be a problem as well. So there's a lot of work out there. I recommend that paper from the Alan Turing if you want to really get into it.
Oh, thank you for that. We are nearing the end of this webinar, so I will be wrapping up as many questions as I can. But first, I have one question that I would really love to ask, and I will just exploit my role as a moderator. And this has to do with facial recognition. And now my background is law, so please forgive my ignorance. But I'm very much interested in how these systems are being trained. Would you be using, for example, the micro expressions as a training system? And if yes, then how would this respond to people like myself when, for example, when I'm being stressed, I tend to frown, or it shows in my face, or maybe the feelings that I experience are not necessarily the feelings that are conveyed through my facial expressions. Would that be problematic if I were to take this automated interview?
Yeah, let me address that. So I think that the best way to think about this is the computer, the system, is better at creating a fake picture of somebody than it is at reading a real picture of somebody, given what what Robin just talked about in the papers he just mentioned, which are spot on. So in our system, we did the research and we crunched the numbers and looked at the micro expressions, what are called facial action units, that you roll together to get to the micro expressions, and found that two problems. You've got a bias issue. They don't read the face accurately with darker skin toned individuals because the cameras and things just aren't up to snuff and the technology is not up to speed yet. And secondly, when you build an algorithm to predict the outcomes, like a competency score on a test or job performance on a job, et cetera, the micro expressions don't add predictive value. They don't add enough what we call incremental validity or statistical validity to the prediction to make it worthwhile to have in the algorithm. That is why that's why we've dropped them, right? We don't use them. So, and then your example, Arjo, is a really good one. Micro expressions would track your frown and indicate that you were sad or unhappy. The computer doesn't know if you're sad or unhappy. I don't know if you're sad or unhappy. I just know you're frowning. I don't know why or what the intent is. And that inferential leap from a frown to being sad or a smile to being happy is unproven in the scientific literature today. The Feldman-Barrett article that really kind of shed a lot of light on this, that looked at Paul Ekman's work for the last 30 years and said, we don't know if you're happy or not. We just know you're smiling. That's all. That's all you know. That data, knowing that you're smiling or knowing that you're frowning, not the expression of happy or sad is not predictive of any additional value in the algorithm. That's why we don't use it, right? But your example is a good one.
Oh, thank you for that. Now, I think that this is going to be the final question, and this is something that is addressed to all of you. I think that we're expecting way too much at this stage from these new systems. And if I may wrap up from all your presentations, it seems that technology is leading the way. There are lots of matters yet to be considered in terms of law and ethics, but it is always excellent to see that lots of these issues are being taken into consideration, and they are being built into the design, or at least that's the intent. Perhaps we're not there yet, but they are not being ignored, and they are definitely being taken into consideration. In the European Union, we have this thing that you people in the States often refer to as the EU legal imperialism, and it goes by the name GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, and that's something as a framework that has given these considerations some teeth. So it definitely has provided guidance forward for all of us. But at the end of the day, as Ben rightly said, we need to be faster. That's the expectation. So how do we make things work? And the final question is, are we seeing a new industry where job applicants will eventually be getting coaching to counter automated decision making?
I think they will. It's not like, are we going to see it? We've already seen it. And in fact, from a video interview perspective, whether you're being scored on the competencies or not by the computer or by humans, we actually provide our system to most universities as a free service to say, for the students, go through and use our system to practice answering these types of questions. So because we don't want the technology to get in the way of the quality of the experience, because they're going, especially with COVID, people are going to go through more video interviews in an asynchronous fashion than ever before, and we don't want the technology to be a barrier. We want the technology to be part of the process. So practice and use the system in practice. So we have coaching. I wrote an article with some folks from NACE. It's a U.S. university college system on sort of how to go through a video interview if it's being scored, and how to use storytelling as an answering format to not enhance your scores, but to give a better answer essentially, and help guide people on how to take these video interviews so the technology doesn't get in the way.
Ben, Robin, I would like to invite you for some final remarks before we finish this session.
Ben, do you want to go first?
Yeah. Well, when robots are helping humans, they are going to take their good side and bad side at some point. On our side, we really try to get to cluster, make statistical analysis on like data that are really not possible to be biased, or are you available or not, or and use the automation for efficiency, to be faster, so cheaper and better in a sense. But yeah, the technologies are going to be used for cognitive decisions, and there need to be some controls everywhere, especially in the modeling of the data, and there need to be some laws regulating this. So yeah, it's a new revolution. So we're gonna figure out the laws after the excess, or maybe we're gonna this time anticipate the excess and like prevent. So yeah, it's fascinating what's happening at the moment.
Well, I just want to say thank you to everybody. I've really enjoyed the seminar. I mean, just my reflection I've worked in law now for more than 40 years, and one of the things I've learned very well just by reflecting on the way law works is that whenever there's a technological development that's significant, there is an absolutely standard process that happens. The development happens, or is made possible to happen. It then is worked on by engineers, scientists, entrepreneurs, thinking what they can do with it. And then they start worrying about the ethical problems about it. And then there's a moment in which the ethics have to be considered, whether there will be advantage to society to have regulation. Now, there's huge discussion at the moment about the ethics on using AI in every kind of context, both generally and specific, and different views about it. And actually, there are arguments that say that it develops in 3 different sections, a sort of Chinese version, a full free market American version, and a European kind of slightly more dirigiste control version of it. But that ethical discussion is happening right now, and there is a clear decision from Europe that there will be regulation in this field. Isn't such a decision here in the UK, and some states, of course, in the US have introduced some regulation about it. What's really interesting about the impact of regulation is it becomes part of social knowledge. So in the days when cars were introduced, initially they were just introduced, then people thought they could go too fast for it to be safe, then there were laws introduced, and then the next thing, we have to learn the highway code before we're allowed out. And what's going to happen next after the regulation is people will be taught in schools about how to deal with this stuff. And it will become part of the social discourse. But we're probably 2 decades off that really getting into schools, in my view. And there will be an interesting age profile between people who really engage with this and understand your question, how do you work with video interviewing to get the best out of it, and people who are in 45 and older who think it's all too difficult. So there's a really interesting kind of social dimension to this. That's why we're talking about it now, and it's why your students and all the people listening are really just taking a step forward with the rest of us in trying to understand the dimensions that we're dealing with. It's a great topic. There are going to be many careers made working in this field. So thank you for letting me participate with you on that.
Thank you, everyone. A special thanks to Nathan, because I understand that it might be a bit earlier over at that part of the world. So we do appreciate that. And many thanks to all the attendees. I wish there was a more democratic way so that we could listen to your voices, but I did the best I could so as to answer as many questions as we possibly could in this time limit. Thank you very much. There will be a recording of this webinar available. And that's it. Thank you to everyone for a fruitful discussion. Enjoy the afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Everyone.